Good evening and welcome to Gravitas. I'm Palki Sharma Upadhyay. Let's get started. In 1996, when the Taliban first took Kabul, they declared that they're not looking for revenge. 1996. They offered amnesty to anyone who worked for the government. But behind the scenes, the Taliban abducted former President Mohammad Najibullah. They castrated him, dragged his body through the streets of Kabul, and suspended it from a lamppost for everyone to see. As they say, those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. Because 25 years later, the Taliban are making the same promises of peace and amnesty. And the world is buying all of it. The Taliban says they do not want any enemies. They're offering amnesty to government officials, talking about women's rights. But away from the world's eyes, they're attacking protesters with bullets and executing rivals. Meanwhile, a resistance is brewing within Afghanistan as the world looks the other way. The people of Afghanistan are protesting. They're taking to the streets to oppose this rule of the Taliban. Former Vice President Amarullah Saleh is mounting a resistance campaign. Can the people of Afghanistan take their country back? On Gravitas tonight, we'll tell you about this growing pushback. Also on the show, while the world focuses on the pictures of chaos, it has completely forgotten about the women of Afghanistan. Starting tonight, we'll bring you one story every day highlighting their plight. And we urge you to join our campaign with the hashtag #SaveAfghanWomen. Do your bit. The New York Times is at it again. The American newspaper is discrediting India's efforts to protect the Afghans who are trying to escape the Taliban's reign of terror. A shocker from Lahore in Pakistan, a social media influencer assaulted by 400 men. One woman assaulted by 400 men on Pakistan's Independence Day. And the Wuhan virus outbreak in America has taken an ugly turn. New infections have spiked by 700% since July. At least 5 states are running out of ICU beds. We'll bring you a full report. We begin as always with Gravitas Global Headlines.
More than 2,200 diplomats and other civilians have been evacuated from Afghanistan on military flights. Civilian flights, however, remain suspended.
UK officials are working round the clock to keep the exit door open in the most difficult circumstances.
Meanwhile, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson has announced a new resettlement schedule to take in 20,000 Afghan refugees. The United Kingdom says it aims to start negotiations for a trade agreement with India by the end of the year. A trade accord with India is seen as a key target for post-Brexit Britain. In a move that will once again raise tensions with the West, the United Nations nuclear watchdog, the IAEA, says that Iran has accelerated its enrichment of uranium to near weapons grade. Following an earthquake, storm and floods, the death toll in Haiti nears 2,000 as rescue teams search for survivors. Japan has now announced that it will expand its state of emergency to 7 more regions, including Tochigi, Gunma, and Shizuoka, in an effort to contain the growing outbreak. The emergency measures have already been imposed in Tokyo, Osaka, Okinawa, and 3 other regions, and were supposed to end by August 31st. Dozens of protesters gathered in front of a gym in Quebec to protest their use of a vaccine passport. Canada is currently working to create a digital vaccine passport that would allow citizens to travel abroad, and it should be available in the next few months. Western United States has been battling a historic drought, with the dry weather sparking water shortages in 10 states. Southern Arizona has been dealing with dry weather conditions, while the northern part of the state has been devastated by flash floods. Firefighters battled a wildfire in wooded hills outside Jerusalem to keep them away from a hospital as planes and crews fought flames for the third day. The blaze, some 10 kilometers west of Jerusalem, sent out clouds of smoke. No serious injuries have been reported so far. Bayern Munich have been crowned German Super Cup champions for the 5th time in 6 years after a 3-1 victory over Borussia Dortmund. Reigning World Player of the Year Robert Lewandowski opened the scoring and set up the second for Thomas Müller. And although Marco Reus pulled one back for Dortmund, Lewandowski sealed the win with his second goal of the night. Defending champion Dominic Thiem has withdrawn from the upcoming US Open and announced that he will not play again in the 2021 season. The 27-year-old has been out of action since suffering a wrist injury in Mallorca in June and has revealed that the pain returned when he started training again last week. Doctors have advised him to allow a much longer time for the wrist to heal.
Three days after the takeover of Kabul, terrorists from the Taliban want to be seen as statesmen. They say they do not want any enemies. They say they do not want any revenge. They're talking about women's rights and assuring minorities their due place in the Afghan society. The Taliban want the world to believe that they have changed. But they haven't. And we'll show you why. In Kabul, they hold press conferences and speak to women reporters to prove that they've really evolved. But outside Kabul, they run their reign of terror. Let me show you some pictures from Jalalabad. Scores of people out on the streets. What for? To protest against the Taliban, to take down the Taliban flag, to unfurl the Afghan national flag. This is perhaps the first pushback against the Taliban takeover in Afghanistan. Do you know how they responded? The Taliban, who apparently want no revenge, who promise safety for everyone, opened fire on their fellow Afghans. Clashes broke out, 3 people were killed, 12 others were hurt. The Taliban, wielding their guns, wanted to scare the people of Jalalabad into submission. It did not happen. The protesters managed to reach the city square. They took down the Taliban flag. They unfurled the red, green and black flag of Afghanistan. Look at this. Jalalabad was not an exception. Reports say such protests were seen in many provinces. As the top military powers of the world beat a shameful retreat, these defenseless people of Afghanistan are facing bullets to fight for their rights. What drives them? The lure of democracy, perhaps, and freedom. In the last 20 years, they've tasted it. They want to keep it. They also see through the lies of the Taliban. They know what a Taliban takeover really means, and their fears are legitimate. Across the country, shopkeepers are taking down photos of women outside their shops out of fear. Some are painting over advertisements. Why? Because these women, the women in these pictures, are not wearing a burqa. And their fate depends on the Taliban's interpretation of the Sharia law. How are the others faring? The Taliban are promising amnesty, asking government employees to return to work. At the same time, they're reportedly executing government workers. They're carrying out revenge killings. Going by one claim, government officials and captured soldiers are being targeted right outside Kabul. Even inside the capital, in fact, there are reports of executions now. A stranded British citizen has revealed this today. Members of the Taliban ransacked his home in Kabul. He says that people living on the same street were executed. There is talk of Islamic law and religious courts. A Taliban spokesperson has admitted that amputation, stoning and execution could soon return to Afghanistan. This is how they propose to rule. This is the real Taliban, make no mistake. In front of the global press, they promised a softer approach on Sharia. They talked about rights. But away from cameras, they've been firing bullets, executing people. They have grabbed power through violence. And now they want to rule by fear. What about the peace talks? What about the talks? There is a tentative revival of the political process, we are told. Mullah Baradar landed in Kabul. He's the co-founder of the Taliban. He escaped from Afghanistan 20 years ago when the United States began the war. Now he's back. 2 decades later, he returns to a Taliban victory in Afghanistan. A large crowd welcomed him at the airport, as you can see. Baradar was surrounded by his supporters, escorted by a fleet of white SUVs. There were fireworks too. A hero's welcome for a terrorist leader. What explains this grand welcome? Baradar's prospects. He could well be the next president of Afghanistan. This man has served as the Taliban's governor for several provinces. This was in the late 90s. When the Taliban were overthrown, Baradar left Afghanistan and divided his time between a Pakistani prison and a luxury hotel in Doha. What makes him the top contender for presidency? Number one, he's a known face around the world. In recent years, Baradar has been the face of all the negotiations in Qatar. He was also the man who went to China to meet the foreign minister. And reason number two, he controls the Taliban. Even after staying away from Afghanistan for 20 years, he maintains a strong influence on these people. And this puts him in a unique position to consolidate power in Kabul. The Taliban have not shared very much about their plans to install a government. But we can tell you that they're engaging with some familiar politicians. Former Afghan President Hamid Karzai and Abdullah have held several rounds of talks with the Taliban. This morning, both leaders met with the senior leader of the Haqqani network. So efforts are underway to find what may look like a political solution. But it will not be a solution, it will be rather a solution dictated by the Taliban. It will be on their terms. What about the former president of Afghanistan, Ashraf Ghani? Where is he? What is he doing? He's right now in the UAE. A statement was released by Abu Dhabi earlier today. It says that they will host Ashraf Ghani and his family on quote-unquote humanitarian grounds. Remember, this man abandoned his people and reportedly fled with millions of dollars. Back in Kabul, no such luck for a lot of people. Thousands are still looking for a way to escape. The Kabul airport still remains crowded. Flights have resumed, but thousands of Afghans cannot get on a plane. They have nowhere to go, they say. And even if they somehow manage to escape, they're likely to be betrayed by gullible leaders, by leaders like Joe Biden. I'm sure you would remember these pictures, Afghans falling from the skies. They clung onto a military aircraft when it took off in a desperate attempt to leave Afghanistan. Ultimately, they fell to their death. That plane belonged to the US Air Force. How do they explain this utter disregard for the lives of Afghans? For the past 2 days, the US Air Force has been silent. It has now admitted, and listen to this, this is very shocking. The United States Air Force has admitted that it found body parts, human body parts, from that cargo plane, stuck to the plane. Officials from the American Air Force say they still don't know how many people died in this episode. They're conducting an investigation. America has left Afghanistan in ruins. The world has seen the immediate aftermath of Biden's botch-up. But Afghanistan is going to feel the pain of this withdrawal for years to come, it seems. Afghanistan's currency called the Afghani, has dropped to a record low. Reports say Afghanistan is now desperately short on dollars as well. Most of the country's currency reserves are held in foreign accounts, and the Taliban cannot access it. The West has cut off the Taliban from the global economy, but it will be the Afghans who will suffer the most. A Kalashnikov on one hand, a microphone on the other. That's how the Taliban see themselves. Not as the violent, regressive usurpers that they are, but as new and improved rulers. Yesterday we heard a 1-hour sermon on this changed Taliban. It was their first press conference in 20 years. What did the Taliban say? A bunch of lies, a whole lot of propaganda. I'm sure you all saw it. Most of the journalists focused on the future of Afghan women. Would they retain their rights? Here's how the Taliban responded.
موږ به ان شاء الله د شریعت په چوکاټ کې ښځو ته د کار او فعالیت اجازه ورکوو. ښځې د ټولنې مهم عنصر ده او موږ دې ته په درناوي ګورو. د ټولنې په ټولو هغه برخو کې چې موږ ټولنه اړتیا ورته لري ښځو به فعال حضور ولري.
How generous of them. Notice some of the language used. They will allow women to work. Why do women need the Taliban's permission to work? Why is it a handout and not a right? And there's more. Towards the end of the statement, the spokesperson says, and I'm quoting, where the society needs them, they will have presence. What are these needs? And who decides these needs? It's another way of saying women will have limited options. The Taliban will decide what jobs women can have. Overriding all of this is, of course, a big caveat. The Sharia or the Islamic law. It's like saying terms and conditions apply. Human rights as per the Sharia, religious freedoms as per the Sharia, journalism as per the Sharia. One problem though, Islamic law is open to interpretation and the Taliban's interpretation is beyond brutal. You may remember their first stint in power. Punishments included public stoning, whipping and hangings. No trial, by the way, straight to punishment. All kinds of music and musical instruments were banned. So were paintings and movies. And for women, life was behind the burqa. They had to stay at home. If they must step out, they should do so with male relatives. How much of this has changed? The Taliban would want us to believe that this is their second coming. For sure, some things have changed, but most of these changes are cosmetic. The Taliban now drive around in SUVs, they tweet from smartphones, they share videos on social media, some of them speak polished English. But what about their ideology? They're still stuck in the caves of Kandahar. And I'll give you an example. This is a statement from Taliban spokesperson Zabiullah Mujahid in 2018, the same man who held the press conference yesterday. This is what he said, and I'm quoting again. We are not against women working in government organizations or against their outdoor activities, but we will be against the alien culture clothes worn by women brought to our country. And that's precisely the problem here. Freedom cannot come on the Taliban's terms. Rights cannot be open to religious interpretation like this. What's even more appalling is the reaction to this press conference. The world is playing the waiting game, satisfied, it seems, with the Taliban's promises. Promises that they're already breaking, by the way. And we have some examples tonight. This is from the Takhar province in the northeast. The Taliban shot and killed a woman on Tuesday. What for? Because she had not covered her head. That was her crime, not covering her head. She's dead. Case number 2. The Taliban say they want women in government. Well, Salima Mazari is a woman. She is in the government. One of the few women governors in Afghanistan. Guess where she is right now? Reports say in Taliban custody. You see, this excuse of the Sharia is a slippery slope. And we've seen it before in countries like Iran. Before the Islamic Revolution, women went to college. They wore what they liked. They roamed freely on the streets. But look at things now. Women are covered in full veil. 75% of children who skip school are girls in Iran. And that's thanks to the Sharia law. And this did not happen overnight. Iran's interpretation of the Sharia hardened over decades. Today, it's not the rule of law, it's the rule of Sharia. Punishments include flogging and amputations. Could Afghanistan go the same way? There's every possibility it could. Let me show you why. This is Afghanistan in the 1970s. These are Afghan women. No signs of a burqa. Women are attending college, they're having a good time at parties. This was Afghanistan before the Taliban. It looks like a modern society. Now look at Afghanistan today. The attire has changed, the freedoms have disappeared, the parties are rare, let alone women at parties. What has changed between then and now? The arrival of the Taliban. Let me show you some pictures you've most probably already seen. These are Afghans trying to flee. Do you know what people are asking? Where are the women and children? Why do you only see men at these airports, this airport in Kabul? What do we say? This is the new Afghanistan, where the place for a woman is shrinking. Do you know how many women we're talking about here? 14.2 million. 14.2 million women in Afghanistan have been abandoned by their president. 14.2 million women have been abandoned by so-called human rights champions the world over. Today, their tormentors are outside their doors and the world is quoting statements from press conferences. It's sad, it's tragic, it makes you angry. But what do? A lot, I say. Afghan women are not in a position to raise their voice. Some of them are standing up, yes, but for most, it's not an option. They can't even ask for help. The Taliban are always watching. But we can be their voice. We can tell their stories, their hardships, their bravery, their spirit of resistance. And we plan to do that. Starting today, we'll carry reports on Afghan women on Gravitas every day. And I urge women across the world to join in. This is a community of 3.8 billion people. There are 3.8 billion women around the world. We have led revolutions. With one hashtag, women have toppled powerful men. Me Too brought down predators across the world. Just a hashtag and stories. They can be very powerful and effective. And it's time to do it again. Hashtag Save Afghan Women. Write to us, get on social media, organize protests, launch fundraisers. Whichever part of the world you're in, put pressure on your government. Do not let them forget that 14 million Afghan women have been chained by a brutal regime already. 25 years ago, the world abandoned a whole generation of Afghan women. They still bear the scars of that oppression. We can't afford a repeat. We have a chance to save them, the next generation, but only if all of us join the fight. Save Afghan women. Here's what else is happening in Afghanistan. A new alliance is taking shape, a resistance to challenge the Taliban's rule. The face of this resistance is Amarullah Saleh, the former vice president of Afghanistan, who says he's now the caretaker president. Saleh is said to be operating from the Panjshir Valley, a region that the Taliban have never been able to conquer. What's the history of this region? What exactly is this resistance up to? And what's the story of Amarullah Saleh? Here's a report.
A former spy, a former guerrilla commander, and the former vice president of Afghanistan. Meet Amarullah Saleh, the man who says he can bring the Taliban down. On August 15th, as the government of Ashraf Ghani fled Afghanistan, Amarullah Saleh was among the few who stayed behind. He went underground and reportedly retreated to Afghanistan's last remaining holdout, the Panjshir Valley, northeast of Kabul, a region that is still free from Taliban control. A day later, on August 16, some pictures emerged. They showed Saleh with Ahmad Masood, the son of a famous anti-Taliban commander. Ahmad Shah Masood, the man they call the Lion of Panjshir. On the same day, Amarullah Saleh put out this tweet, claiming that he is still on Afghan soil, for a cause and purpose. So what exactly is he up to? Reports say that he is forming an anti-Taliban alliance. Amarullah Saleh's hideout, the Panjshir Valley, has historically been a stronghold of resistance against the Taliban. The group could not conquer the valley in its last regime between 1996 and 2001, mostly because of its geographic ruggedness. Also because of the Northern Alliance, the most potent force of resistance against the Taliban, perhaps a blast from the past, is on the cards. The Northern Alliance leaders are said to have begun regrouping. And Amarullah Saleh, who is himself from the Panjshir Valley, is said to be playing a prominent role in this regrouping. But what exactly is his story? 48-year-old Saleh belongs to the Tajik ethnic group of Afghanistan and was orphaned at a very young age. He also had a sister who was tortured to death by the Taliban in 1996. In a Time magazine interview, Saleh had said, "My view of the Taliban changed forever because of what happened in 1996. By 2001, as part of the anti-Taliban resistance, he became a key asset for the CIA. The relationship paved the way for him to lead the newly formed Afghan intelligence agency in 2004. The National Security Directorate, or the NDS. The chief of the NDS, Saleh, is believed to have amassed a vast network of informants and spies across the country. Time and again, this network has helped Saleh expose the Pakistan-Taliban nexus. Such was his expertise that in 2010, the ISI and the Taliban are said to have regarded Saleh as their fiercest opponent. Cut to 2021. As the Taliban's offensive began in Afghanistan, it was Saleh who exposed how the cantonments of Quetta and Peshawar are orchestrating the Taliban's onslaught, and how the Pak Air Force was providing air support to the Talibs. He was Afghanistan's vice president. Now he is the face of a new alliance against the Taliban, an alliance they're calling the Panjshir Resistance. If history is anything to go by, this resistance could prove to be a formidable force against the Taliban. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
Even amid civil war and chaos, trust the Western media to create trouble. Today, their story is Afghanistan, but their target is India. We're talking about a familiar culprit, the New York Times. This is their latest headline. India says it will prioritize Hindus and Sikhs in visas for Afghans. A dream headline for the West. Just one problem. India never said that. So where did the New York Times dig up this news? From this tweet by India's External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar, what does it say? We are in constant touch with the Sikh and Hindu community leaders in Kabul. Their welfare will get our priority attention. The tweet talks about the welfare of Afghan Hindus and Sikhs. It does not talk about visas. But the New York Times has gladly glossed over that. The Indian government has a moral obligation to protect Afghan Hindus and Sikhs. They are open targets for the Taliban. Plus, they have ancestral roots in India. But does this mean Afghan Muslims have been ignored? Not at all. The Home Ministry has announced emergency visas for Afghan nationals. Basically, anyone who applies will be fast-tracked. The ministry's tweet is on your screen. The New York Times had a different take on it, a more sinister take. Here's what their writer says. The tweet does not say whether Muslims, who make up the majority of those seeking to leave Afghanistan as the Taliban take over, would also be considered. Well, what does common sense say? If no religion has been mentioned, then clearly religion is not a consideration. It's not a criterion. But the New York Times' outrage overwhelmed logic and common sense. If only they had looked at the emergency visa portal. This is what it looks like. A fairly simple form with 9 fields. Your nationality, your passport number, your date of birth, your email ID. These are some of the questions. Do you know what is missing here? Religion. India's emergency visa process does not ask for religion. There is no priority for Afghan Hindus and Afghan Sikhs. Every persecuted Afghan is being considered for an Indian visa. How could the NYT get it so wrong? Fact-checking is journalism 101. How can a 120-year-old newspaper forget that? Because this was not about journalism. This was about discrediting India, to portray India as a bystander to what is happening in Afghanistan. This is not just fake news. This is dangerous and misleading. In times of crises, responsible reporting is important. People look to the media for accurate updates. And what do they see? Biased articles that peddle half-truths and fake news. The fact is, India has a long history of helping Afghanistan. In all of these years of war, never once has India forcibly deported Afghans. Many Afghan politicians have resettled their families in India. They attend school and college here. Some of them work here. Thousands of ordinary Afghans have also made their home in India. This includes the Afghanistan national cricket team. Since 2016, their home ground has been right here on the outskirts of New Delhi. The New York Times happily ignored all of this history. And it's not a first for them. Mudslinging India is probably a new beat of journalism for them. They pounce on random tweets and make a story out of them. What happens when they're proven wrong? It doesn't matter. This article is still available on their website. It is a complete disservice to India's humanitarian efforts. In the last 14 days, India has approved 4,600 visas. That's 4,600 Afghans who will soon be flying to India. Well, here's a fun fact for the New York Times. The entire Hindu and Sikh population of Afghanistan is less than 1,000. Again, if only they had fact-checked. Right now, most embassies have shut operations in Kabul. Only Pakistan, Russia and China remain. They've conveniently cut deals with the Taliban. That leaves one country still issuing visas to Afghans, and that country is India. No priorities, no religious benchmark, just a helping hand. So to the New York Times, maybe it's time for some introspection. A war-torn country is going through immeasurable trauma. Now is the time for the media to step up and tell important stories, not peddle lies to push their agenda. For once, the editors at NYT should keep their politics out of this. Speaking of which, it's been a tough week for the US president. The criticism that he's facing over Afghanistan has been unprecedented, to say the least, and not undeserved. He has only himself to blame for this, though. Now, Biden's approval ratings have fallen. This is the sharpest dip in the last 7 months. Biden's Afghan policy is an unmitigated disaster, and he's paying the price for it. Afghans are paying the price for it, and Afghanistan is fast turning into a terror haven. The Lashkar-e-Toiba is already in Kabul, we're told. The ISIS and Al-Qaeda, too, are reportedly looking to make it a base for their resurgence.
From the fight for health care
For the first 7 months of his presidency, Joe Biden seemed invulnerable, above criticism, as if no event or decision would change public opinion about him. That dream run is over. And it was quite short-lived for a man who won the highest number of votes in American history. Biden's approval ratings have fallen, and how? According to a survey by 538, which is basically an average of all reputable polls, Biden's approval rating has seen a 5-point decline in the last 4 months, from 54% in May to 49% in August. In other words, in May, 54% Americans approved of Biden's performance as president. By August, only 49% of Americans said Biden was handling his job well. This is the sharpest dip he's seen. What explains it? His botched-up withdrawal from Afghanistan. Biden apparently put America first by pulling out troops. But the way he did it, full of blunders and contradictions, is making Americans see red.
We'll not conduct a hasty rush to the exit. We'll do it responsibly, deliberately, and safely.
Is the Taliban takeover of Afghanistan now inevitable?
No, it is not. It is not inevitable.
Kabul is not, right now, in an imminent threat environment.
The Taliban is not the North Vietnamese army. There's going to be no circumstance where you see people being lifted off the roof of an embassy of the United States.
It's not so much about why it was done. It's more about the way it was done. The pullout was an unmitigated disaster, and the aftermath will come back to bite America. Afghanistan is already turning into another safe haven for terrorists. Reports say a large number of terrorists from the Islamic State, Jaish-e-Mohammed, and Lashkar-e-Taiba have entered Kabul in the last few days. The Taliban leadership is said to be aware of their presence and apparently also approve of their presence. But that may change. Afghan observers say these terror groups may indulge in operations without the Taliban's approval. The Al-Qaeda, which was the reason America invaded Afghanistan, is also said to be eyeing Kabul as a base for resurgence. We're not saying this, the United Nations Security Council is. In a June 2021 report, the UNSC said the Taliban and Al-Qaeda remain closely aligned, and Al-Qaeda stands to benefit from renewed credibility on the back of Taliban gains. What did Joe Biden say about the Al-Qaeda? This.
We severely degraded Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan.
There are falls from grace, and then there is Joe Biden. This disaster is still revealing itself. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
At the end of every civil war comes a difficult question. What do we call the victor? Are they a government? Or are they still insurgents/terrorists? It's a tough question, especially in Afghanistan. Let me tell you why. The Taliban are no ordinary rebels. They are religious zealots. They have a history of guarding terrorists, of being terrorists, killing their own people. But today, they are an indisputable reality. The Taliban are lounging in the presidential palace. They're holding press conferences. It doesn't matter whether you like them or not. For world leaders, this is a new headache, a new reality. Do they recognize the Taliban regime or not? Do they wait and watch? Or do they reject them outright? Some countries cannot hide their happiness. I'm talking about the likes of Pakistan, China and Russia. Imran Khan said that Afghans had broken the shackles of slavery. A hard sell looking at the scenes in Kabul airport. This chaos is not what emancipation looks like. For these countries, the decision is pretty straightforward. Recognize the Taliban and get something in return. But for Western nations, it is a tough call. They fought the Taliban for 20 years. They lost soldiers to Taliban attacks. Can they afford to recognize the new regime? On Sunday, it was all gung-ho. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson ruled out relations with the Taliban. But 2 days on, he's having second thoughts. The Prime Minister spoke in the UK Parliament today. He said that he will judge the Taliban based on their actions.
We will judge this regime based on the choices it makes and by its actions rather than by its words. On its attitude to terrorism, to crime and narcotics, as well as humanitarian access and the rights of girls to receive an education.
Talk about high hopes. The Taliban are not turning woke. They're saying exactly what the international community wants to hear. Why? Because they need money. And it's not just Britain. The United States, too, is playing the waiting game. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan said, this is the National Security Advisor of the US, and this is what he said. He expects the Taliban to protect human rights.
What we expect from the Taliban going forward, that is something that will have to be watched and observed over time, whether in fact they are prepared to meet their obligations to the basic human rights and human dignity of people.
Same with the European Union. Recognition or not, they say talking to the Taliban is a must. We understand there are no easy choices here. Only one reality. The Taliban are in control of a war-torn, impoverished country. Millions of Afghans are homeless. How do you help them without engaging with the Taliban? Will aid money fund the Taliban's army? Chances are it will. What about social media? The Taliban of 2021 is social media savvy. They have around 900,000 followers on Twitter. 900,000. One of the most prominent faces is Suhail Shaheen. He boasts of 360,000 followers. Of course, Twitter doesn't care. They're busy banning presidents and breaking rules. But what happened to the ascetic Taliban? How are they using American tools? Does the Sharia allow this? Just goes on to show their hypocrisy. Social media helped the Taliban sweep across Afghanistan. Their spokesman talked about peace and diversity on Twitter. But on the battlefield, they were massacring Afghan soldiers. What did Twitter do to flag this disconnect? Pretty much nothing. The sensitive tweeting machine does not care about Taliban propaganda. What about other social media platforms? Facebook has banned all accounts praising, supporting and representing the Taliban. YouTube says it will do the same. What about young Taliban fighters? Everyone has a smartphone these days. What is stopping them from using Instagram or TikTok to peddle propaganda? The answer is nothing. Taliban have been in fact posing as social media stars. They've been using social media. They post pictures from war and videos of hate speeches. It's become a powerful propaganda tool. Why is no one cancelling them? Apparently, it's for information. The world wants to know what the Taliban spokesmen are saying, even if it's propaganda or complete nonsense. Will they also hand over Afghan government accounts to the Taliban? If and when they make a government, what they call a government. It's certainly a possibility. We're talking about American companies here. They use the State Department's terror list for such decisions. In 2019, Twitter took down accounts belonging to Hamas and Hezbollah. Both of them are listed as foreign terror groups. Guess who isn't? The Taliban. The US has already legitimized the Taliban. They signed a diplomatic agreement with them last year. Talk about strange times. Until a few years back, these people were hiding in caves. They were being hunted by Western troops. Today, we're debating putting them on Facebook. Yes, in the end, only power matters, irrespective of the monster who wields it. Meanwhile, in the US, the Wuhan virus pandemic has become a big worry again. The country is witnessing an alarming spike in cases. Since July this year, new infections have shot up by a whopping 700%. This is the fourth wave, we are told. In at least 5 states, hospitals are running out of ICU beds. More than 90% of these beds are already occupied. Here's a report on America's pandemic crisis.
In the United States, hospitals are overwhelmed again. America is witnessing a 4th wave. Driving up the cases is the Delta variant, and the spike is alarming. In at least 5 states of America, more than 90% of the ICU beds are full. Across the country, 75% of adult ICU beds are occupied. By Tuesday, 46 out of 50 states in the United States reported a double-digit growth in cases. And the worst could still be coming. The director of the National Institutes of Health has made a dire prediction. He says that the United States could see more than 200,000 new cases every day. What's the figure right now? Around 129,000 new cases daily. This is a 700% increase since July. Hospitals in the southern part of the country are stretched to their limits. Doctors and nurses are dealing with a record number of patients and deaths.
It's actually really hard. I made it a whole year without crying, and then actually a couple of months ago left here from work crying because of so many two deaths in one shift from patients that I've had for very long periods of time.
The United States has a population of 330 million. Half of these people are fully vaccinated against the Wuhan virus. On the basis of this, the mask mandate was withdrawn by health officials. But now, new infections are growing, and mask rules are back. Authorities in Los Angeles have made the mask mandatory for everyone at large outdoor events. Even fully vaccinated citizens will have to wear masks. Restrictions are being imposed on the unvaccinated population. This has led to a backlash from the public. On Saturday, a man was stabbed outside the Los Angeles City Hall during a protest against vaccination mandates. This protest was led by the anti-vaxxers, the people who are opposed to vaccinations. And this opposition is driving the surge. The virus is targeting unvaccinated Americans. In 40 states, less than 6% of fully vaccinated citizens ended up in hospital, even after they contracted the virus. And less than 7% of them have died. Moral of the story, vaccines help, even against variants. But Americans aren't convinced, and their government is failing to convince them. The daily vaccination rate has dropped drastically in the United States. In April, the United States was administering more than 3 million shots a day. By August, the average dropped to 736,000 shots a day. That's a fall of more than 70%. Unless America can get those numbers up, it will be struggling to contain the virus. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
On the 14th of August, Pakistan marked its Independence Day. It was supposed to be a day of pride for Pakistani citizens. It ended up as a day of national shame. As Pakistan's leaders in Islamabad were singing glory to their nation, miles away in Lahore, a woman's dignity was being violated. What I'm about to show you could be very disturbing to watch. This video of almost 400 men groping, pushing, tearing the clothes of one woman in broad daylight, 400 men. If you think this is gut-wrenching, then try watching it. The assault went on for several hours. The men dragged, assaulted, kept tossing the victim to each other, all the way till the evening. Doesn't make your blood boil. Then let me show you some responses. A few tweets by the people of Pakistan justifying this assault, defending the actions of the mob. They say the woman instigated this by making vulgar videos in public. They say the men are not robots. If a girl dances in front of them, what should they do? Do you find this unsettling? Then let me show you some images. These are men, teenagers rather, filming the entire incident, streaming it live on the internet, smiling all the way as they do so. No remorse on their faces. They don't even look disturbed, no trace of shame whatsoever for what's happening to one woman. 400 men. Does this make you angry? Then wait till you hear where this happened. The victim was shooting a video near Minare, Pakistan in Lahore, a monument that has Quranic verses inscripted all over it. A monument that is supposed to be a symbol of Pakistan's Islamic identity, a symbol of Pakistan's motto, the land of the pure. The land of the pure. If anything, Pakistan is in desperate need of some purification. The men at least. We've never seen a sight like this. It speaks of the rot in the society, a rot that flows all the way from the top. Right from the Islamic seminaries across Pakistan to the Prime Minister's office in Islamabad. Imran Khan Niazi deserves all the blame for this shameful incident, for what happened with these 400 men targeting one woman, because time and again he has acted as an apologist for such predators. Here's a simple sample from June this year. The Prime Minister said, and I'm quoting, if a woman is wearing very few clothes, it will have an impact on the men unless they are robots. He's using the same words. It's just common sense, says Imran Khan. His words sounding exactly similar to those used for justifying this horrendous assault. Isn't Imran Khan promoting such actions against women by saying the things that he does? Isn't he fostering such toxic misogyny instead of ending it as Prime Minister of the country? These are questions that the people of Pakistan must ask. Because things are taking a very dangerous turn in their society. The last few months, we've seen several reports of Pakistani women getting assaulted, being killed, converted, stabbed, beheaded, burnt alive. The worst of the crimes that one can think of. And I'll give you some recent examples. On the 19th of July, the son of a government official tortured and killed his wife in Pakistan's Sindh province. The couple had 4 children. 24th July, 30-year-old woman was raped and stabbed in front of her son. She died struggling for her life in a hospital in Rawalpindi. 25th July, a man burnt his wife to death again in Pakistan's Hyderabad. Their 17-year-old daughter also sustained serious injuries. 25th July again, a man sprayed a volley of bullets at his wife, 2 underage daughters and their aunt. None of them survived. To add to this, we keep getting stories of minor girls, mostly from minority communities, being abducted and forcefully converted across Pakistan. August 2020, a 14-year-old Christian girl, Maria Shabazz, was abducted and married and forcefully converted. A case was filed. The court called it a matter of free will. October 2020, a 13-year-old Christian girl abducted in broad daylight, converted to Islam and then married to her abductor. What did Pakistan's courts call it? A matter of free will. The girl is 13 years old, for God's sake. And in March this year, at least 3 minor girls were abducted, converted to Islam and married to their abductors. No prizes for guessing what the Pakistani judiciary called these cases. A matter of free will. Would you believe it? I could go on. There's a long list of crimes against women in Pakistan unfolding on a daily basis. But no amount of outrage or movements are going to stop them. It will take generations perhaps to wipe out this deep-rooted misogyny and sexism from this society. I'm going to wrap with this. We're leaving you as always with Gravitas Images. Thanks very much for watching.
第4巻の最終判断に成果がつながれました。